One of the events that I've been covering for over 10 years now is the Red Bull BC1. This is a breakdance competition that Red Bull does all over the world. And here in Japan, we have about 5 or 6 ciphers every year. When I shoot these ciphers normally, I'm basically using my 24 to 70 for about 80% of the work. Allows me to get pretty wide at 24, plus zoom in at 70 for anything I need like that. If you've been to Japan, you know it is quite tight, quite compact. A lot of the clubs that we're using around Japan tend to be quite small. So in years past, the 24-70 was pretty much okay for a lot of things. Did have to use my fisheye once in a while, which I don't particularly like using for this kind of an event. But this year especially, I noticed that Osaka, Nagoya, and Tokyo especially are very, very small clubs, and I was thinking the 24 to 70 would just be a little bit too tight in for the kind of space that I'll be shooting in. And so because of this, I went out and rented the Nikkor Z 14 to 24 S lens. Now, if, as you know, looking at this video probably, this is an ultra wide zoom lens. It's f2.8 all the way through, and at 14 millimeters, it should be enough to get me wide enough to get the whole body of the breakdancers in, even if they do come a little bit closer to me in these tighter spaces. Now, for the purpose of this video, there are 5 different things I was looking at while I was using this lens during these 3 different competitions that I was shooting for Red Bull. First, obviously, we'll talk about the lens build. Then I want to talk about how the autofocus worked in these kind of situations. Also, the usability and convenience of the 14 to 24 millimeter focal length at these kind of events. Also, of course, when you're shooting at 14 millimeters, that's extremely wide. So you are bound to get some sort of distortion. And lastly, I was just kind of thinking about how this lens would also be a good option for when shooting video. So I took some video with this lens as well, and we'll look at that at the very end. So starting with the lens build, as a lot of the S series of lenses that Nikon has for the Z series of cameras, this lens has both an aperture ring, it has a couple functioning buttons, and it has a focus ring on it, as well as the zoom ring. Now, in my shooting particularly, I often shoot these events in manual, and I do not want my settings changing during the shoot. And like I've said in my other videos looking at the S line of lenses for the Z series of cameras, the programmable ring that is usually set by default to aperture, you can change it to a myriad of other things, but when you put it on the camera for the first time, it's probably set to aperture. It is very smooth, very easy to use, almost too easy, so that when you are just kind of walking around and you brush against it or your hand might slip against it while you're focusing or something like that, there is a good chance you're going to be changing your aperture. So for me, I just turn this off. So you can just go into the camera like this, really quick down to the menu, and you can just turn it off. So, you know, it's a great lens. There's lots of functionality to the buttons and everything like that. But me, maybe a bit of an old schooler, I just shut that off. And I just wanted to zoom and autofocus, and I'm more than happy. Another selling point of this lens is that, let me just quote this, Nikon says that it's the world's shortest, lightest 2.8 ultra-wide zoom. Now, I had the F-mount variation of this, and I remember it being a real beast of a lens. A lot of glass in there. Quite heavy, not the easiest lens to use because of that, and so I actually ended up selling it after a couple of years of really just kind of sitting on my shelf for a long time. But using this lens over the 3 days, I found it to be actually, yeah, like they say, very light, easy to use weight-wise. And you know, there's a couple times where I'd have my hands up above my head trying to get a shot, and sure, my arms would get tired doing that, but I also had the lens on a Z9, which is what I'm shooting on today, and it is in no way a small body. Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about the weight of the lens at all. But it, you know, saying that, it does feel nice and sturdy and strong when it's in my hands, and it's a nice balance actually on the camera as well. So you're not compromising anything because of this lightness. It seems that Nikon did a really good job of taking away the unneeded weight, but still keeping a really nicely well-built lens that seems durable and good to use in all sorts of situations like that. Now, with regard to the speed and accuracy of the autofocus when using this lens, so, you know, we're in quite dark areas. The camera initially has some difficulty picking up some of these B-boys movements and things like that. A lot of the B-boys and B-girls just were all black, which is not really my favorite thing for them to do. I prefer if they had a bit of color, add some contrast so the camera can follow them easier. But all in all, I think the camera did a great job of keeping up with all the action. You know, for the action that I was shooting, 99% of the time I was shooting, it was dead on. It was perfectly fine. There's a couple of really difficult situations that I think almost any lens would have a hard time with, depending on the camera that it's on, maybe. But all in all, I had a great time with it, and I really wasn't frustrated by missed shots or back focusing or not keeping up with the action at all. With the autofocus, it was fast enough, and it was great. Now, with regards to the actual focal length of the 14 to 24 millimeters, it's kind of a unique focal length that a lot of photographers probably wouldn't be using on a general day-to-day basis in their work. But for these kind of events that I was shooting, this was really kind of a lifesaver this time. Like I said, I looked online, I looked up the clubs that I'd be shooting at, kind of guessed about where the dance floor would be, and I was like, okay, there is no way I can get a full body shot of the dancers at 24 millimeters here. And yeah, like, you know, here's a video of me standing in the back of one of the clubs. Here's at 14 millimeters, so it's quite wide, and you're like, oh, you got tons of space. But then if you zoom down to 24 millimeters, geez, that difference of 10 millimeters in focal length really makes a big difference of what you can get in your shot. So there's a lot of times where if I didn't have that ability to zoom out all the way to 14, I didn't zoom out all the way to 14 for every shot, but having that ability to zoom out from 24 millimeters, geez, that really saved me a lot, especially when I'm shooting like inside the circle of that they create with people watching and the dancers are right there. If I didn't have that lens, I would not have gotten nearly half the shots I would have been able to get. Actually, in Tokyo, I was a little bit too close, and the judge showcase round that they had, I actually got kicked in the head by one of the judges. So yeah, sometimes being extra close is not always the best thing. You do need a bit of distance, but in this situation, that's just the only place I could sit. So having the 24 to 14 millimeters, at least in these jobs that I had, when I was in the circle and really up close, was amazing. It really helped me out, and I couldn't have gotten half the shots I got without it. Yeah, so up close, 14 to 24, amazing, helped me out tons. But that's not the only spot I shoot from. I tend to move around, go back a little bit further up above and things like that. And when doing that, sure, if you want to get like a full out venue shot, 14 to 24 is amazing. You can really get a lot of people in, not need to move all that far back. Really shows, that there's a lot of people there watching it, which is something clients always want, something Red Bull always wants to show. But as soon as you're that far back out, now you're really kind of stuck on what you can do with the 24 mils. Because again, 24, it's not that zoomed in, it's not that zoomed out. So you get this kind of like middle ground where you're far enough back that I want to zoom out and get that full venue shot, but then you're stuck. Like you kind of like can't get really dynamic shots of the dancers from there, and you're really stuck on that 24 millimeters because that's as far as you can zoom in. So when I'm shooting, I do need a variety of shots, and I do need a variety of angles and things like that. So to do this, I switch lenses. Now, when I was in Nagoya, I was able to just use the one lens, move around and stuff like that, because it wasn't that big and there weren't that many people. But in Tokyo, to get back behind all the people and get a wider shot, I was actually so far back because there were so many people that then when I tried to use the 24 mils, it just wasn't quite enough. So I had to switch to my 24 to 70 for a few rounds just to get a better, different variety of shots, which is something you always need as a professional photographer. So, what I'm trying to say is the 14 to 24, although is amazing at certain distances and certain things for action, it's obviously not going to be the end all and be all of event lenses and things like that. It's not the one lens you would ever use for an entire event, unless it is like something super compact and tiny, like the one event we had in Nagoya. So moving on, the next thing I'd like to talk about is what kind of distortion this lens creates at the wider focal lengths of 14, 15, 16 millimeters in that. Now, this lens is nowhere near the distortion you get, say, from a fisheye lens, which I used to use a lot, and it's got a really unique look to it, so I really liked it at the time. But saying that, it doesn't have no distortion. There is obviously distortion at the wider focal lengths of this lens. So I took a video of this wall, and you can see that these flowers in that, when they're in the middle of the frame, they look perfect and there's no distortion. But obviously as I pan away and bring them up to the side or the corner of the image, there is a little bit of distortion. With shapes and things like this, it's not really super noticeable because it's just like kind of what it is, and it's an abstract piece of art. And you don't really kind of understand, your brain doesn't really click on it super fast that there's a bit of distortion. Especially in a video, you kind of just like slide through it. But when you're shooting stills, especially of people, even more especially, and you start getting body parts off in the corner, or heaven forbid your subject's head is down in the corner, or people are going to have huge feet, huge hands. So you really have to be aware of where you're placing your subject in your images when using the really wide focal lengths of the 14 and stuff like that. But in the end, if you keep them rather centered and just kind of not go too extreme to the sides or the corners, you should have no problem. And even then, if they're quite close, a little bit of distortion adds kind of to the dynamicness of the image. But just be aware there is some distortion in this. And if it's people, it's really noticeable if you put them off to the side or they're really close to the lens. So just be careful when you're using it and keep those things in mind. And then lastly, I have been shooting more and more video lately, video for work, video for YouTube and things like that. So I really wanted to see what kind of video I could shoot with this lens as well. And I was pretty happy with what I got. It was pretty cool. It's neat to have a lens that can go so wide, and yet the center in that is not like fisheyed and everything like that. And you can really get a whole nice view of the venue, of the dancers, full body dancers. When you're even a little bit closer, you don't have to play around too much. And I really like the quality of the video I got with this. I know one thing that my friends always say about my videos is they look great, they're pretty, and they're well edited, but I need more of a variety of shots in my edit. And so I think having kind of a lens that can go this wide and I can move in closer and get a bit more of a dynamic and a lot of movement towards the lens and things like that, it could be something that really helps elevate my filming and my edits as well in the end. So this is a lens I'm also looking at getting into with the thought of shooting it with video as well. And like I said, I got some pretty cool videos. These dancers are amazing, so anything you take of them is just cool. But this lens was really helpful, and I think it'd be really cool for anybody taking any kind of action sports and stuff like that in the future. Yeah, so all in all, I really liked using this lens. It was kind of a lifesaver in Nagoya and Tokyo especially. So in the end, I would love to sell a couple things and pick up this lens, but as you know, with the S series of lenses from Nikkor Z bodies, they're not cheap. This is quite an expensive lens, so it is something that I really have to think about carefully as an investment, and think about things that I could sell that I don't use to use this lens as well. But saying that, I think for the meantime, I'm going to kind of just stick with what I have, and then when I have an event coming up that looks like I could really benefit from this lens, then I will try to pick it up again and rent it, and save myself on the whole huge cost of buying the lens and just rent it for a little next couple times. And if it really seems to be something essential, then I will probably pick it up again in the future, maybe used. I don't know, Nikon hates when I do that, but yeah. Yeah, hopefully I can pick it up sometime in the future. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you liked it. I had a ton of fun using the lens, ton of fun shooting these events. If you're ever in Japan during the period that we're doing these events, it's open to the public, so just buy a ticket and come on in and check it out. If you see me running around like crazy taking images, just tap me on the shoulder and say hi. I love to chat with people who come and check our events. Yeah, so cheers, thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.